Picture this. The most powerful man in the world stands trapped in a palace by the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by an angry mob of 20,000 Egyptians calling for his blood. Outside the windows, Alexandria burns. Ships clash in the harbor as Roman legions fight desperately against Egyptian forces in the shadow of the Great Lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. And at the center of this chaos stands Julius Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul, locked in the most dangerous gamble of his legendary career. Not for gold, not for territory, but for a woman who claims to be a living goddess. This isn't just any woman. This is Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, a ruler whose intelligence rivals her beauty and whose political cunning matches Caesar's own. She's smuggled herself into his presence wrapped in a carpet, and now she's asking him to risk everything: his army, his reputation, even his life, to place her on the throne of the richest kingdom on earth. What Caesar doesn't know is that accepting her proposal will trap him in Alexandria for 6 months of brutal siege warfare and ultimately change the course of world history. Welcome to Professor Archive, where we uncover the dramatic truths behind history's most pivotal moments. I'm your host, and I'm about to take you into the heart of one of the most extraordinary military campaigns ever fought. A conflict that was simultaneously a civil war, a foreign intervention, a royal succession crisis, and the beginning of one of history's most famous love affairs. This is the story of the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC, where Julius Caesar fought not just for Egyptian gold, but for the woman who would become the mother of his only legitimate son and the key to his dreams of Eastern Empire. To understand how Caesar found himself in this impossible situation, we need to go back to the autumn of 48 BC, when the Roman world was tearing itself apart in civil war. Caesar had just achieved the most decisive victory of his career at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, crushing the forces of Pompey the Great. But Pompey himself had escaped, and as long as he remained alive and free, he remained dangerous. Caesar faced a choice: pursue Pompey immediately while his enemy was weak, or consolidate his victory in Greece. Against the advice of his officers, Caesar chose pursuit. That chase led him to Egypt, the richest and most mysterious kingdom in the Mediterranean world. Egypt was not just wealthy, it was fabulously, almost incomprehensibly wealthy. The annual grain harvest from the Nile Delta could feed Rome for 4 months. The royal treasury contained more gold than most kingdoms saw in a generation. But Egypt was also a kingdom in crisis. The current pharaoh, Ptolemy XIII, was only 10 years old, and real power was held by regents who faced a challenge that threatened to destroy their authority. Ptolemy's older sister, Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was no ordinary royal sibling. At 21, she spoke 9 languages fluently, was a brilliant mathematician and skilled diplomat who had won the loyalty of much of the Egyptian population. More importantly, she was the rightful queen of Egypt. But Ptolemy's regents had driven her from Alexandria and declared war on her. When Pompey's ship appeared off the Egyptian coast in late September 48 BC, Ptolemy's regents faced an impossible choice. If they welcomed Pompey, they would anger Caesar. If they turned him away, they would appear weak. So they chose what they thought was a clever third option. They invited Pompey ashore and murdered him as he stepped onto Egyptian soil. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria 3 days later with only 3,200 legionaries, he was met by representatives bearing Pompey's severed head. They expected gratitude. Instead, Caesar wept. Pompey had been his son-in-law, and the assassination represented everything Caesar opposed about Roman politics. He ordered Pompey's assassins crucified. This put Caesar in immediate conflict with Ptolemy's regents, who had expected thanks but received condemnation. The situation became even more tense when Caesar announced he intended to remain in Alexandria until Egypt's enormous debt to Rome was repaid and the succession dispute resolved. The regents saw this as intolerable interference, but they couldn't resist openly. So they agreed to Caesar's demands while secretly planning to eliminate him. Their opportunity came when Caesar took residence in the royal palace complex. Magnificent beyond description, but also a trap surrounded by the hostile city. This was when Cleopatra made her famous entrance. The story of how she had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence wrapped in a carpet is famous, but It's misunderstood. This wasn't romantic theater, it was brilliant politics. It demonstrated her courage, resourcefulness, and intelligence while allowing her to present her case privately. The meeting between Caesar and Cleopatra lasted the entire night, and by morning, Mediterranean history had changed. Caesar announced he would support Cleopatra's claim to the throne, with Ptolemy XIII ruling alongside her as co-pharaoh. But this decision meant war. When Caesar summoned both siblings for a reconciliation ceremony, the tension was electric. Caesar offered generous terms: joint rule, shared authority, Roman protection. But young Ptolemy XIII, prompted by his regents, declared he would never share power with his sister, and that Caesar could leave Egypt immediately or face the consequences. Caesar found himself in the most dangerous position of his career, trapped in a palace in a hostile city, vastly outnumbered, with his nearest reinforcements weeks away. But Caesar also saw opportunity. If he could hold Alexandria until reinforcements arrived, he could place Cleopatra on the throne and establish Roman control over the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. Caesar's first priority was securing the palace complex. He ordered his men to barricade entrances and establish defensive positions. But his most important decision was retaining control of Ptolemy XIII himself. When the young king tried to leave, Caesar's guards prevented his departure, making Ptolemy his honored guest. The regents responded by declaring Caesar an enemy of Egypt and calling for uprising. Within hours, angry crowds gathered in Alexandria streets. The siege had begun, and it would last 6 months of brutal urban warfare. Alexandria was unlike any city Caesar had fought in. With over 400,000 inhabitants, it was the largest city in the Mediterranean after Rome itself. The Egyptian forces were formidable. Over 20,000 men commanded by Achilles, one of the most capable generals in the eastern Mediterranean. But Caesar's greatest disadvantage was logistical. His force was running low on supplies and completely cut off from resupply by land. If Egyptians controlled the harbor, Caesar would eventually starve. Caesar's solution was characteristically audacious. He decided to capture the Egyptian fleet before it could be used against him. The Egyptian navy was one of the most powerful in the Mediterranean, with over 70 warships anchored in Alexandria's harbor. Caesar's attack on the fleet was launched at dawn on the third day of the siege. Using every vessel he could find, Caesar's men launched a coordinated assault on the anchored Egyptian warships. Caesar himself led the attack, leaping from ship to ship with sword and torch, personally setting fire to enemy vessels. The battle raged for 3 hours before the Egyptians broke. By midday, the entire Egyptian fleet had been captured or destroyed. But Caesar's victory came at a terrible cost. Fires from burning ships spread to the waterfront warehouses, and from there to the famous Library of Alexandria. By the time fires were controlled, a substantial portion of the library's collection had been destroyed. Despite this cultural catastrophe, Caesar's naval victory achieved its objectives. Egyptians could no longer blockade the harbor, and the destruction demonstrated Roman military superiority, convincing potential allies throughout the region to support Caesar. The siege settled into a pattern of daily violence and constant tension. For 3 months, this stalemate continued. It was during this period that Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra deepened from political alliance to personal intimacy. Caesar was 52 at the height of his power, but increasingly conscious of mortality. Cleopatra was 21, brilliant, beautiful, and desperate to secure her throne. For the first time in her life, she had found someone who could be both equal partner and passionate lover. Their relationship scandalized both Roman and Egyptian opinion, but they ignored these concerns and focused on survival. They knew their personal relationship was also a political alliance that could reshape the Mediterranean world. The stalemate was broken in January 47 BC, when news arrived that a Roman relief force was approaching. Mithridates of Pergamon had assembled over 15,000 men and was marching toward Egypt. This created a new strategic situation, forcing both sides to reconsider their options. Caesar decided on a characteristically bold strategy. He would launch a coordinated attack to break Egyptian control of key positions, while signaling the best approach route to Mithridates. The target Caesar chose was the island of Pharos, which controlled harbor access and served as foundation for the famous lighthouse. The assault began before dawn on February 15, 47 BC. Caesar personally led the attack, crossing the harbor in small boats while his ships provided covering fire. The fighting on Pharos was brutal. Egyptian defenders resisted with fanatical determination. The lighthouse base became a fortress, with defenders shooting from the tower windows. Caesar's men fought street by street, house by house. The turning point came when Caesar led a direct assault on the lighthouse itself. Using scaling ladders, Roman soldiers climbed the exterior, while Caesar fought up the internal ramps. When the lighthouse fell, the psychological impact on Egyptians was devastating. It was not just a military position, but a symbol of Alexandria's greatness. But Egyptian forces, recognizing they could no longer control the harbor, began planning a final assault on the palace complex. Achilles assembled over 15,000 men for a coordinated attack from multiple directions. The final battle for Alexandria began at dawn on March 20, 47 BC. Egyptian forces attacked from north, south, and west, while preventing Roman escape toward the harbor. Caesar's defense relied on the palace's architecture. Thick walls and narrow passages would limit Egyptian numerical advantages. The battle raged for 6 hours with unprecedented intensity. The turning point came when Caesar spotted a gap in the Egyptian attack formation and led a counterattack directly into it. The assault was so unexpected it created panic among Egyptian forces. But just as Caesar found himself cut off and fighting for his life, news arrived that changed everything. Mithridates' relief force had appeared on the horizon. The sight of Roman standards electrified Caesar's men and demoralized the Egyptians. Achilles ordered a general retreat that quickly became a rout. The siege of Alexandria was over, but the war for Egypt continued. Achilles had preserved most of his army, and the conflict required a decisive battle to resolve. That battle would be fought on the banks of the Nile River. Achilles had withdrawn to a fortified position 20 miles south of Alexandria, where the western Nile branch provided defensive advantages and access to river transportation. Caesar, reinforced by Mithridates' army, commanded about 18,000 men against Achilles' 20,000. But Caesar's greatest advantage was psychological. The siege had demonstrated Roman determination in a way that impressed allies and discouraged enemies throughout the region. The key was controlling the Nile itself. Caesar's plan was characteristically audacious. Instead of assaulting Achilles' fortified position, he would construct a river fleet and challenge Egyptian control of the Nile directly. Using timber from the destroyed Egyptian fleet and equipment from Mithridates' army, Roman engineers constructed over 40 vessels in less than 2 weeks. These weren't sophisticated warships, but floating platforms designed to carry legionaries. The Battle of the Nile began at dawn on March 27, 47 BC, when Caesar's fleet moved into the main channel to challenge Achilles' naval forces. The battle was fought in 3 phases. Initially, both fleets used catapults and archers while maneuvering for advantage. Egyptian vessels more familiar with the river initially held superiority, but Roman engineering soon began to tell. Caesar's vessels had been designed specifically for this battle. The second phase began when Caesar personally led a ramming attack against Achilles' flagship. The attack was so sudden it caught the Egyptians off guard, allowing Roman vessels to close to ramming distance. The close quarters fighting showcased Roman military superiority. Roman legionaries, fighting from stable platforms with superior training, systematically overwhelmed Egyptian crews. Caesar fought in the front ranks, leading boarding parties and engaging enemy commanders in single combat. The turning point came when Caesar's forces captured Achilles' flagship and the Egyptian general was killed. Loss of their commander created panic, and several vessels attempted to flee. But Caesar had positioned vessels to block retreat. By midday, the entire Egyptian fleet was eliminated. Caesar had established complete Roman control over this section of the Nile, making Achilles' land position untenable. The land battle that followed was almost anticlimactic. Egyptian forces, demoralized by naval defeat and their commander's death, offered only token resistance before retreating. Ptolemy XIII was captured while attempting to flee, and within 3 days, remaining Egyptian forces had surrendered or dispersed. Caesar's solution for governing Egypt was to implement his original proposal: joint rule by Cleopatra and a male co-pharaoh. Since Ptolemy XIII had proven unreliable, Caesar arranged for Cleopatra to marry her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 11 and would be completely dependent on his sister. This gave Cleopatra effective control while maintaining the appearance of traditional Ptolemaic rule. By the time of the Battle of the Nile, Cleopatra was pregnant with Caesar's child, a son born in June 47 BC and named Caesarion, Little Caesar. Caesar's Egyptian campaign had achieved all objectives and more. He had eliminated organized resistance, established Roman influence over the richest kingdom in the region, and created a personal alliance with one of the most capable rulers of his generation. But the campaign also revealed limitations of Roman power and complexities of governing a multicultural empire. More importantly, Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra had created expectations that would influence his future decisions and ultimately contribute to his assassination. The Battle of the Nile was Caesar's last major military victory and, in many ways, his most complete triumph. He had defeated enemies, conquered territory, established political settlements, and created relationships that enhanced his power throughout the known world. But the victory also marked the beginning of Caesar's final phase, when his successes would create as many problems as they solved, when achievements would inspire as much fear as admiration, and when his relationship with Cleopatra would symbolize everything his enemies opposed. As Caesar prepared to leave Egypt in summer 47 BC, he could look back on a campaign that had tested every aspect of his abilities. He had demonstrated military genius, political skill, and personal courage. Most importantly, he had shown that Roman power could adapt to new challenges and overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. But Caesar's Egyptian triumph also contained seeds of his eventual downfall. The wealth gained would allow him to build dangerous political support. His enhanced military reputation would make him seem invincible to supporters and threatening to enemies. And his relationship with Cleopatra would provide opponents with ammunition that he had been corrupted by foreign influence. The man who sailed away from Alexandria had learned there were no limits to what he could achieve if willing to risk everything. That lesson would serve him well in his final years, but it would also contribute to his death, because a man who believes there are no limits to his power inevitably discovers there is one limit he cannot overcome: the determination of other powerful men to prevent absolute authority. That concludes our journey through one of the most dramatic military campaigns in ancient history here at Professor Archive. From Caesar's arrival in Alexandria to his victory at the Battle of the Nile, we've witnessed how personal ambition, political necessity, and romantic passion combined to reshape the ancient world. If this exploration of ancient warfare and politics has given you new insights into how individual decisions change history's course, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got many more pivotal moments that shaped our world. What surprised you most about Caesar's Egyptian campaign? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the most important battles are fought not just for territory or treasure, but for the right to determine civilization's future. Until next time, this is Professor Archive reminding you that history's greatest victories often come at the highest personal cost, and that the line between triumph and tragedy is often thinner than we imagine.